Kandor was considered the capital city of the whole planet Krypton.
Before Krypton was destroyed, Brainiac showed up, abducted the entire city, stole the whole city from the planet and kept it in a bottle. You've got this most powerful human being on the planet, but that inside is always searching for who he is, what sort of connection to his roots he can have, and Kandor fits right into that.
For Superman, every question that you could possibly have wanted to ask can be answered now. And you're no longer alone. You're with others like yourself. So it was a great concept.
The Silver Age comics really delved into Superman's roots on Krypton, much more than later years. The Silver Age comics embraced getting to know other Kryptonians, and there was the whole city of Kandor. Whenever you look at Kandor, you would see flying cars, or people who could fly.
It had so many things that Brainiac was after in those original stories, because of the intelligence, because of their control over their planet, their elements, and all of that. And what he did was he shrunk it.
And he's got an entire city in a bottle filled with people. The people are still moving, they're walking, they're living their lives, they're just stuck. So it is a piece of Krypton that was preserved.
Kandor.
He put it on a shelf in his spaceship, the same way Indiana Jones put the Ark of the Covenant inside this warehouse. It's one of 18 zillion sealed boxes. It's one of 18 zillion sealed planet globes.
Superman was able to get this bottle city from Brainiac and kept it in his Fortress of Solitude.
Superman wanted to free them, of course, and it used to bother me in a sense that he didn't just open the bottle.
There were a couple of what-if comics where he did do something like that. Then you had all those superpowered people, all of a sudden, your whole city of superpowered people, and that led to some really bizarre problems.
Does everyone have to suffer because the fear is that one or two of them or a few of them might, not play along as well as they hope? I think that's a huge moral challenge for Superman, but Superman being Superman, he doesn't want to make that decision. It's not his decision to make. His decision is to try to save the people, and then ultimately, if something goes wrong, correct that wrong.
Most of the stories in the Superman comics did not go multiple issues. And if you're gonna enlarge a whole city of super people, it kind of forces you to have to spend a little time and energy explaining what happens if you do that. It takes a little more space than just 22 pages or 12 pages or whatever they were doing back then. So they may have just wanted to avoid it for that reason.
For better or worse, at times, Superman can be a tough character to write stories for. He's so strong that it's hard to find challenges. Certainly during that period of the Silver Age, he was also being written as incredibly smart, infallible, and so they really had to kind of push the envelope looking for places to tell fun Superman stories.
I think 50s and 60s stories, Superman used to shrink himself down and go into Kandor and have adventures in Kandor, and they drew it like just bizarre space age, all sorts of weird buildings. Not to mention, are there problems with diseases? Are there problems with when he goes in there? Does he have to hose himself down or bring something out like Kryptonian disease? All sorts of amazing questions, all sorts of problems with Kandor.
There's always a question that comes out with Superman. If you take away his superpowers, is Superman still a superhero? Well, lo and behold, you get the Kandorian stories and he goes inside the bottle city and he loses his powers. And he still decides to be a superhero, but not just a superhero, but he decides to emulate one of the other greatest superheroes on Earth, which is Batman. And his relationship as Nightwing and Flamebird is basically a reflection of what Batman and Robin are doing on Earth. And the fact that he felt the need to take on that type of identity, to still go out and try to proactively help the people of Kandor, shows the inherent nature of who Superman is.
It gave the Superman books a chance to have some of the elements that were successful and popular. So they got to have some cool Batman and Robin adventures in a futuristic Superman city, which was kind of fun.
The writers at the time were people like Ed Hamilton and Otto Binder, all science fiction writers. For the most part, Superman didn't have a lot of science fiction stories, so when they did, they actually did the stuff that they themselves loved. They weren't, for a brief time, catering to kids again. Again, remember, this was, comics were read by 8 to 12-year-olds. They occasionally were able to do a story for themselves. I think the Krypton story, then tying it with the Brainiac concept, was really great science fiction and not seen before in comics.
In the post-crisis revamping of Superman, the push went in the other direction to really go back to him being the only survivor of Krypton, or at least, since things would start to creep back in again, to keep the number of survivors down to as few as possible. Maybe some of the fun and the innocence was lost, but I think for the better, because you can tell so many, better stories now with these characters than before that. In the mid-90s, the marching orders from DC were very clearly to reduce the number of other Kryptonians as possible. We kind of had to argue to get Supergirl into the series. There was really a drive to keep that to a minimum and have Superman be unique again. The idea that you've got this most powerful human being on the planet and who always has to exude this confidence, and you always think of him as this, square-jawed, confident guy, but that inside is always kind of searching for his own identity, is always searching for who he is, what sort of connection to his roots he can have, didn't get to know his own parents, his Kryptonian parents, didn't get to know anybody on the planet of Krypton. And so Kandor fits right into that.
As a writer, I think that's certainly an interesting idea of someone who never actually tangibly knew where he came from. Everything was always known through other things, through the crystals in the Fortress of Solitude. Culture and immerse yourself in it and learn everything about something that's long, long dead is really interesting.
The scenes inside the bottle of Superman interacting with Kryptonians and meeting his aunt and uncle, Zor-El and Allura, are wholly original to this adaptation.
Great Rao. He looks just like his father.
There, I looked for an opportunity to humanize Superman, to find those places where you juxtapose this super-powered character with completely relatable, completely human situations.
Please, tell us more about Kara.
She's having some trouble adjusting to a new world, but she'll be all right.
So it's this family reunion. It's the parents who sent their daughter off finally getting news from where they sent her to find out, yes, Kara's rocket made it to Earth, and she's okay.
We were in Kandor, visiting friends when those things attacked.
Supergirl is someone who has deep trauma at the beginning of the story from her past experience with Brainiac, and it's affecting her living and doing her job at the beginning of the story. Over the course of the story, she has to learn to confront those fears and face Brainiac. She gets a chance at a do-over.
When we reintroduced Supergirl to our mythology in the DCU, we wanted to make her stronger, more independent, more thoughtful, much more aggressive in who she is, because ultimately we wanted her to be a real teenager.
I think what's interesting is that she not only ties in for a political storyline, but an emotional one. I mean, she's family for a man who has no home. That's pretty interesting. And she's younger, even though she has memories of the world that he never knew. Supergirl even says at one point, it's almost better that you don't remember Krypton. It's almost better that you were a baby and you can't miss it. And that speaks to the missing of those cities, of this culture being gone.
No!
She actually remembers it. She remembers being there, and so there is loss. What Jeff does in this series, which is really, very touching and very smart is you get both sides of this man. You get the Superman, and you get how Superman has this huge responsibility and what he has to step up and be. But you also get how he is a man and how he lives his life, and he goes through sort of the same sort of problems we have. You know, where he's got this douchebag at work where he's got to deal with, and he's got to cover this thing, and his cousin's always whining at him, and yet he's got to step up, and he's got to stop one of the greatest threats in the entire universe that also has a piece of home and who he really is.
No. It's happening here. It's happening again.
The fact that Brainiac is in the process of stealing Metropolis as well, that's kind of like a double whammy for Superman. It's like it's his past and his present being screwed around with. So this becomes a emotion versus emotionless story.
Kandor as a MacGuffin is true. You know, he's fighting for it, but Superman has to stand up and fight for all of those cities. And it's that great moment where he realizes, like, oh crap, he's done this before, and he's done this a lot. I've got to do whatever I can to stop him.
There is big action in this story. There are giant fights. Superman sees a battle for the life of another planet that he discovers while looking for Brainiac, and we witness the destruction of that planet. And we see the stakes of what will happen if Brainiac finds Earth and what he'll do to Earth.
That cyborg core inside him, it wants to know everything there is to know in the galaxy. But that's
Zor-El is very paternal, kind of articulates the theme of the story.
You can't control a living thing without destroying what's alive about it.
To Superman, it's in the middle of his talking about Lois.
It definitely was a cool metaphor to suggest that Superman was being so overprotective of Lois that she might as well have been kept in a bottle. So Superman was maybe doing the same thing that Brainiac was doing.
I'm in danger all the time, Clark.
And I'm not thrilled with that either.
Superman's point of view is to protect Lois. Does he understand that he's overprotecting her? Not until he runs into Brainiac. I think one of the faults Brainiac has is that it's not just knowledge that gives a character power. It's how do you use the knowledge.
You don't really know these worlds. You only know your safe, bottled versions of them.
I think Brainiac is a really smart character. He's absorbing knowledge, but he really doesn't know how to apply every single thing.
Oh! Ah, and that is dirt. Look at it. Bugs, and worms, and bacteria. You see them?
He would have been better served to learn a few things from Superman before Superman took him down.
I don't ever want to stop you from being you.
Anytime you're telling stories, you want characters with understandable motivations. Whether they're the good guy or the bad guy, whether the audience would say, yes, I would do that in that situation, or no, I wouldn't do that in that situation. You want the audience to understand why they're doing it and for it to be realistic and for it to make sense from a logical and character point of view. And maybe the real difference between a hero and a villain is whether the audience says, yeah, that's the side I would be on in this argument.
I think the somersault of these stories is always, how do you do something that doesn't disregard everything that came before, but also falls in line with it and embraces it, and is in the same vein, but gets to tell a different kind of story. So in that sense, I thought it was it's a great solution.
You can't have 100,000 Kryptonians and not have a problem. That's the world that we've built. That's the DC universe. You can't introduce that into a system, an ecosystem, and not expect the ecosystem to change. So therefore, as long as the Kandorians are there and they exist, they are a threat, or they are a boon, depending on what happens. I mean, what we've never seen is ideas and technology that exists within Kandor make its way out and help the people on the outside world. We're always going inside the bottle. but we haven't seen how the bottle has affected the outside world other than the Kandorians themselves. And I think that's more of an exploration of story that needs to come.
It's okay for this stuff to evolve and be cyclical. And now there are tons of characters from Krypton running around the DC universe again, which is cool. And in 10 or 20 years, somebody will think we need to streamline this again, and they'll pare it back again.
These characters around 40, 50, 60 years, you know, first thing you want to go is every story's been told, but somehow, some way, somebody comes in and says, and looks at it from the side or a different angle that makes you scratch your head, go, you know what, I think there's some potential there.